My neighbor has the worst timing. Are we still, should we pick this stuff up or are we?
Well, yeah, so I want to, in the next like 5 minutes or so, I want to start lecturing on the nervous system because that's a pretty lengthy chapter. My suggestion for the brain is to keep it for at least like a week. Put it in like a Ziploc baggie, maybe even stick like a couple wet paper towels in there to keep it from drying out. And then as we go through some of the things today and tomorrow on the nervous system, you might say, oh, I kind of remember seeing something like that on the brain. Let me go back and look at it. So that's my hope, is that that'll work out.
Should we wash our tool? It says to like rinse them, but like I feel like I should use dish soap or something.
Certainly
we're
can.
not cross-contaminating. No one's gonna get an infection or anything, but
Right. There's nothing, I mean, it's just preservative.
okay.
So yes, you can rinse them. You can do them with soap, and you do them with just water if you want. That's fine.
Just be really careful with that scalpel. I did not cut myself, but they are so sharp.
Yep, that's the thing about scalpels. They're meant for cutting flesh, right?
Yeah, I wasn't expecting it to be so easy.
Yeah.
All right.
I watched a video on YouTube of somebody dissecting a sheep brain, and instead of cutting it in half with a scalpel, she actually pulls it apart and called it teasing it apart.
Yep.
But I was really surprised at how easily it came apart, you know?
Yeah. And when you're dissecting, that's actually, I mean, as gross as it sounds, using your hands is actually the best way to do it because you're less likely to cut through any tissue that's, maybe important. Like using something dull like your hands will, it'll come apart naturally in the right places and you'll be able to see more a lot of times. You can certainly get the two cerebral hemispheres apart that way. I don't know how easy it would be to get the cerebellum cut in half that way, right?
Well, some of it did just sort of naturally come apart, I felt like, it's
Right.
It's interesting how that is.
I
Like
used to
puzzle
work
pieces.
I used to work with a woman that did dissections and like never used the scalpel.
Wow.
But she also like didn't wear gloves most of the time.
Oh.
Which, I mean, your preference, I guess. There's no blood or anything, but it's just, I don't know.
Yeah, I hope she didn't bite her nails or anything.
Right.
Ew.
Gross.
And this stuff can go right in the trash, right?
It can. Yep.
And these will be okay without the preserve in it for a couple days?
Yeah.
I mean, probably soaked it up by now.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in this PDF that I posted, the brain backgrounds and dissection instructions, it talks about the chemicals that they use and how they rinse it real thoroughly and everything with this, what is it, Carosafe or something that they use, so that it can be just disposed of in the regular landfill and everything else. There's nothing, nothing harmful in it. So I think what I'll do the next week, we're going to dissect the eye because we're doing the senses. And I think what I'm going to do is not only make a demo video like I did this weekend, but take some still pictures. Because if I take some still pictures and post those on there, on the website, on Moodle, it'll be easier for you guys to see. It'll be clearer for you to see because what I found is it's hard to, hold the brain up to the camera and be able to see it real well and everything. It kind of looks like just a white blob.
I didn't realize how much stuff they actually gave us because I was like, should I try to save my gloves? And then I realized when I was opening everything up that there's a pad for everyone.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, they
This is
package up,
awesome.
it's a pretty good package of stuff that they put in there. And there's stuff, my daughter's all excited to learn her blood type too. She doesn't know her blood type. I don't know. There's one of the labs is blood typing, and it's, first of all, it's always confusing. So we'll go through it a lot before we get to it. But, I'm like, you're going to have to like prick your finger with, a lancet, like somebody who's diabetic. You got to like prick your finger to get your blood. She's fine with that. She's all excited about that. So, which is kind of cool because I don't know if you can do it necessarily in the lab. I work at a few different places and they use simulated blood when they do their blood typing experiments because you need to have like a biosafety level 3 lab, I think, in order to use human blood. So you have to go through more, you have to jump through more hoops, and the Department of Public Health has to approve your site and all that stuff. Whereas if you're at your house, you can prick your finger,
And at first I was like, wait, are we going to be drawing blood too? Or is he going to teach us how to draw blood? And my sister was like, I think you'll probably just prick your finger. And I was like,
Yeah. It's like
damn.
one of those little lancets, those diabetic lancets that you use. I didn't even look to see. There must be one in that kit, though, in there somewhere. I didn't even look to see. There must be one in there.
Yeah, at first I was thinking that the scalpel would be in with each one or something. So I
Oh,
had to run back downstairs to go grab my scalpel earlier. Like I felt like such an idiot. Like, how
no,
did
it's.
I realize it wasn't in here? I had no instruments to use, So I should have dug around a little bit more.
I was so excited for this. I was pulling stuff out like at 11:30 today, getting it all set up, checking
Yeah.
everything out.
Me too.
Yeah, the box has been open in my basement for like 2 months now since it got sent here. When
Yep.
I looked through all of it, like what's in there? What are they sending them? My wife won't go near it. Close it up. Put it over there.
My landlord came by to do an appraisal on the house, and I have all this
Yeah.
stuff laid out. He's like, what are you doing here? He said, I'm nothing, just cutting a brain open today.
Just making sure you appraise it at a high value. That's all.
Yeah, they're selling it to me, so keep it.
Oh,
keep it in a
there
good
you go.
way.
So we can sell it low. We can, yeah.
I've gotten to do a cow's brain before
Mhm.
because I had an EMT class and we actually we did a cow brain and then we got a whole lung set and a heart.
Mhm.
And we were able to actually ventilate the lungs, and we were actually
Yep.
able to dissect the lungs and see the alveoli, and that was a really great class.
Wow.
So they were cow's lungs? Oh, Jody, you're cutting out.
Yes.
They were cow's lungs are
Yep.
huge. We had a set of cow's lungs when I worked at South Carolina down south, and they're huge. Like they don't look real. But I mean, cow's a big animal, so it makes sense.
Yeah. There's where I live, there's actually a slaughterhouse not too far away from here. So I actually went to go and talk to them and got a couple of different samples, and we were able to bring them in because we were talking about it in class. So I'm like, oh, I can get this. So we were actually able to do it as part of class.
Oh wow,
It
that's
was actually
cool.
really neat. Yeah.
Really cool. All right,
If
so
someone
here
was-
we are. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
If someone was, this isn't human, but if someone was interested in dissecting, looking at variations in different animals for different structures and things, can you order that type of thing from Carolina? Can people just order that stuff, or is that really
That's-
specialized?
That's a good question. I don't know. You could try going on Carolina and seeing if you could buy things with a credit card. I've always ordered through them with a purchase order, which is, it has to be obtained through a company. But I don't know if they take direct sales to customers.
I'll have to
I
check
know
it out.
that there are some companies that do kits, especially with as many people are homeschooling now. There are some companies that do kits and things like that that can get shipped to your house, but I don't know the extent of it as far as specimens go.
Yeah.
You may be able to get worms or frogs, but I don't know if you can get a sheep,
hmm
But-
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. I know they're not that expensive, like for
You
colleges
might be
and
able to go
universities.
to, like, if you could find a butcher.
Well, yeah, you could get them from a butcher, but a butcher is going to be, it's going to be, it's not going to be preserved. So, like the advantage of like the pigs that we're going to do is that they've injected them with blue and red latex, so you can see the arteries and veins, you know, and there's no blood or anything like that. So that's the advantage to ordering from a place like Carolina.
Well, yeah, because when I went to the, it's called Blood Farm, they're actually, it's a whole butcher thing. They make sausage, they do everything there. And when I went to go talk to them, when they gave me the heart, it still had the cardio, I can't remember, it still had the layer around it, the
Pericardium.
pericardium.
Yep.
Yeah, it still had the pericardium around them. When I cut it all off, I got to the aorta and nicked the aorta, and then all this coagulated blood started to come
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
And then when I dissected it, I was using my finger to trace it out and actually like push more coagulated blood through it. So it was actually cool to see where the blood was coming through.
Right. Right. Whereas the hearts that we have that we'll dissect don't have anything in them. And I still have everybody do that sort of exercise, like take a probe and, you know, go through some of the great vessels and see where your probe ends up so that you can differentiate between the vena cava and the aorta and the pulmonary artery and all that stuff. But yeah, the advantage is that there's no blood there. When I was at South Carolina, it was one of my first teaching gigs, and I taught freshmen there, and they had their second class. They all have to do a rat dissection. It's a anatomy based class, and so each person has to get their own rat. And the bookstore made a mistake. The department made a mistake the first year that I was there, and the rats all got shipped to the bookstore. And so these kids had to go like walk across campus to their bookstore and buy a rat for $12 and come back with their little bag with their rat. The bookstore was not happy about getting a case of rats in. It's not like they were live. They were like what you have. They were all in individual bags and everything.
Oh my goodness.
All right, so let's get started with the nervous system. So nervous system is a lengthy chapter. We'll do the nervous system this week, today and tomorrow, and we'll probably have to go into it a little bit next week. And then next week is the senses, which I think are really cool too. But the nervous system is really lengthy for good reason. There's a lot to it. And we are studying the nervous system with the endocrine system because they are similar. They actually coordinate all the activities in your body. So they are maintaining homeostasis. They're communicating, right? There are ways that you communicate with, you know, from one area of your body to the next. The difference is the nervous system is really fast. You can get a signal from your brain to any of your muscles really quickly. Like I said, milliseconds, thousandths of a second. But the endocrine system is a much slower system, right? It takes a lot longer for a message to get from one part of your body to the next. The endocrine system we'll see it's a system of glands and hormones. So the hormones get into your bloodstream and they travel all over your body. And so the nervous system is pretty much the most complex organ system. It monitors the body's internal and external environments, right? So not only your senses and what's going on around you and the temperature around you, but also your internal temperature, right? And all your internal conditions. It integrates all the sensory information, which is the next chapter. It integrates information from your eyes and your ears and your nose and your tongue. And it coordinates both voluntary and involuntary responses. So pretty much any muscle that you can consciously move, that's voluntary, but there are all kinds of involuntary responses too. You know, our whole digestive system is coordinated by nervous actions. Our heartbeat, obviously that's involuntary. Our lungs, that's involuntary. So there's a little bit of both. So the nervous system starts off with this big drawing, and I'll probably redraw this I'll probably share the whiteboard with you in a minute. So the nervous system, in order to study it, we tend to break it into central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. So CNS and PNS, right? Central nervous system, what's in the central nervous system?
Spinal cord and the brain.
Good, the brain and the spinal cord, everything in the center, right? And the peripheral nervous system is everything outside the central nervous system. Sounds like a cop-out, but that's really how it's defined. All of the nerves that are outside the brain and the spinal cord, so they're running all throughout our body, our abdomen, our arms, our legs, everywhere. The peripheral nervous system is further divided. So we have the central nervous system. That's just the brain and the spinal cord. That is what it is. The peripheral nervous system, in order to study it a little bit better, it's further divided. And so it's divided first into afferent and efferent. Afferent means incoming, right? Efferent means outgoing. So the afferent part is bringing messages into your central nervous system, right? So these are messages coming from everywhere in your body, whether it's your skin or your eyes or your ears, right? These are messages coming in through the afferent division into the central nervous system.
And that's somatic, right?
Nope, we haven't gotten there yet.
Oh.
So somatic is only part of the efferent. So this could be, I guess they call these somatic receptors, and somatic just means, in this case, just means receptors of the body. So, or it can be visceral sensory receptors, which would be internal organs, right? So what they're meaning with somatic here is like, you know, the receptors in your skin are picking up different things, and they're sending those messages through the afferent division to your central nervous system. Visceral would be like, you know, you have pain coming from your stomach or your gallbladder or something like that. It's an internal organ, and that is still going through the afferent division into the central nervous system. Okay, so afferent is going toward the central nervous system, incoming. Then your central nervous system kind of processes that information, and it sends a message back out. And it sends it out through the efferent division. Right? So efferent is sending messages out. A lot of times afferent is also called sensory, okay, because it's sensory information coming in, whether it's, you know, touch or temperature or vision or hearing or anything like that. It's sensory information that is afferent. It's motor information that's efferent. It's going out to tell a muscle to move, or sometimes to tell a gland to secrete something, usually telling a muscle to move. So afferent is the same as sensory, efferent is the same as motor. Now, the motor division of your peripheral nervous system is further divided into somatic and autonomic. Now, what does autonomic kind of sound like?
Automatic?
Automatic, right? So that's the easy way to think of it. Autonomic nervous system is controlling things that are involuntary. Okay? The somatic nervous system is controlling things that are voluntary. So the somatic division of your efferent nervous system is controlling skeletal muscle. Remember, skeletal muscles are any muscles that we can consciously contract. Does anybody know what soma means? Somatic, the word soma is Greek.
Body.
Body, good. So these are pretty much all over the body, right? But they're named body because of skeletal muscles. They are controlling your skeletal muscles. If the message is autonomic, it's controlling something that is automatically controlled, right? Something that's involuntary. With all of those involuntary responses, with anywhere that the involuntary nervous system is going, there is both a parasympathetic division and a sympathetic division. Sympathetic is fight or flight. Parasympathetic is called rest and digest. So let's take, for example, an outgoing message that goes through the autonomic nervous system, and it's sending a message to smooth muscle. One of the places that we have smooth muscle is in our digestive tract, right? So that's automatic. We don't have to actually send messages to our digestive tract to try to push food through our digestive system. Your autonomic nervous system has both parasympathetic nerves going to your digestive system and sympathetic nerves going to your digestive system. Okay. The same thing going to cardiac muscle. Where is cardiac muscle?
Heart.
Your heart, right? That's controlled by the autonomic nervous system. We don't have to think about sending a message to our heart. We can't. It's involuntary. But there are both sympathetic nerves and parasympathetic nerves going to the heart. Okay. Now, the difference is sympathetic is going to cause the heart to do one thing. Parasympathetic is going to cause the heart to do the opposite, right? They are opposites of each other. Sympathetic is fight or flight. So if you're driving down the road and somebody, you're driving down the highway and somebody swerves into your lane, your sympathetic division takes over, right? Fight or flight takes over. Does your heart rate go up or down?
Up.
Goes up. So in fight or flight mode, what you're doing is you are perceiving some sort of a threat. Your brain perceives something as a threat, and you are getting ready to respond to that threat. So things like your heart rate and your breathing rate speed up, so you can get more oxygen and more blood around to your muscles, right? Because you might have to run for your life. That's the primitive thinking, right? That's the way this pathway works. If you are not activating the sympathetic division, you're activating the parasympathetic division. And I said that's rest and digest. So if you're activating parasympathetic nerves to your heart, what do you think happens to your heart rate?
Goes down.
It goes down.
They
At rest,
sound exactly
right? This is what
opposite
you
of
do
each
at
other.
night. This is when you relax and get ready to go to bed at night. Your heart rate goes down, right? Some people do, different like breathing techniques or meditation techniques. And that is activating the parasympathetic division, which causes your heart rate to go down. Now, I interrupted somebody that was asking
Oh,
a
no,
question.
well, I interrupted you. I was just saying that they sound like they should be opposite. If you're thinking of it that way, like sympathetic, I would think that would be the parasympathetic.
Oh, just because of the word sympathy?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting because it just
Gotcha.
sounds more calming or something.
Right.
Or the sympathetic would be calming you down and helping you in that way.
Right.
So
Yeah, I see what you're saying. But yeah, sympathetic in terms of this, sympathetic is always going to be fight or flight. It's always going to be, it's usually upregulating. Now, one place where it's not upregulating is your digestive system. Sympathetic response is fight or flight. So when your brain perceives a threat, you want to breathe more to get more oxygen into your body. You want to push more blood around your body to get more oxygen to your cells so that your muscles have more oxygen. You want your pupils to dilate so that you can see things better, even if it's dark. You don't care about your bladder or your digestive system, right? Your brain puts that stuff on hold. Your brain isn't concerned with that. So in order to digest, your parasympathetic nervous system has to be active. That's why it's called rest and digest. Now, we have Easter coming up, right? Easter, Thanksgiving, those big holidays, what do we tend to do a lot of? Eat. And how do we feel after we eat that big meal?
Tired, sleepy.
Tired, sleepy. Well, there's good reason for that. After you eat that big meal, your brain is trying to digest that meal, right? It's not worried about fight or flight. It's not worried about getting into a fight with somebody, usually. You are worried about digesting that meal. And so you're activating your parasympathetic nervous system. in activating your parasympathetic nervous system to digest, you're also activating your parasympathetic nervous system to your heart and to your lungs, and slowing down your breathing, slowing down your heart rate, doing all the things that you do right when you go to bed, right? When you go to sleep, when you relax at night. So your body either activates parasympathetic or sympathetic to all of the organs at once, right? You're not going to activate sympathetic to your eyes and then parasympathetic to your heart and sympathetic to your lungs. It's either all sympathetic or all parasympathetic, right? So that's why we feel really tired after we eat a big meal, is because our body's trying to digest that meal and is activating this parasympathetic division, which is also calming us, right? It's slowing our heart rate down, it's slowing our breathing down. It's doing all the things that you would normally do to relax and try to go to sleep. So it has nothing to do with L-tryptophan. It's just that you eat a big meal. If you went tonight, if you ate a big bowl of pasta or something like that, you would feel sleepy. It's the same thing.
I have a question.
Sure.
I've seen so many people who are obese, and I asked what happened, and they said that they feel comfort on eating.
Mhm.
So it makes sense because of the parasympathetic. It makes them feel good.
That's part of it, sure. It definitely makes you feel good. A lot of times, certain foods actually release certain neurotransmitters as well. Like I think certain sugar does, chocolate definitely does. They release certain neurotransmitters that make you feel good that are really similar to endorphins, which you get when you get a rush from working out or anything. So some people kind of get addicted to that, right? They get addicted to that rush of it, right? And in some cases, it's just kind of a mental addiction of, food comforts me. It makes me think of, home when I was young or something like that. It could just be that too. But yeah, it certainly would have a calming effect on people, right? It would slow down their heart rate. It would slow down their breathing, that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So that kind of makes sense with the whole stress eating thing. Like if you're really stressed or if you're anxious and eating has that effect automatically, then that
Right.
is important and that would make sense.
Right, absolutely.
Doesn't endorphins mean morphine within or something like that?
Yep.
Yep.
They're natural painkillers.
Yep.
So like you get them, like, believe it or not, I used to run. I don't run anymore. But if you're a runner, you hear about that runner's high.
Yeah.
And for me, it would always be after about the second mile, I wouldn't feel my legs anymore. Like I don't know, you're just going. It doesn't really, you don't have any pain or anything like that. It just, your body naturally starts producing them to fight any sort of pain. My wife runs half marathons. And so the same thing, after a couple of miles, you don't feel it. It doesn't hurt anymore.
Like with tattoos. I'm not a runner.
So with tattoos, there's definitely that rush of adrenaline when you get a tattoo. There's definitely a rush that goes with that makes you want more of them. Yeah, absolutely. And the protective mechanism, like you're saying, of producing a painkiller, so that you're not thinking about that pain, right? How many times in the moment does somebody, like right after a car accident or something, somebody says, I don't feel any pain, I feel fine, I don't want to go to the hospital. And it's because they're getting those endorphins coursing through their body to protect them. But that ends up being worse in the long run, because then a day or two later you're in pain from something like a car accident. All right, so this is a really good slide, right? This really sums up a lot of the nervous system. Make sure that you know the difference between central and peripheral, and then all these divisions are part of the peripheral nervous system, right? Peripheral can be somatic or autonomic. Somatic is voluntary, autonomic is involuntary. If it's autonomic, if it's involuntary, it's either activating parasympathetic or sympathetic.
And fight or flight is the same thing as like an anxiety attack or panic or something? Is it doing the same thing?
Probably. So a panic attack would probably be triggered by a mechanism. So fight or flight kicks in when your brain interprets something as being a threat, right? So if you're having a panic attack, it's probably something that's not really a threat that your brain is
Right.
interpreting as
But
being
you
a threat.
still physically get the same symptoms. Okay.
Right, exactly. Okay, so this goes through it in words. The central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord. Peripheral nervous system is all neurotissues outside the CNS. See, I told you that's the definition. That's a cop-out. And then within the PNS, you have afferent and efferent. Afferent is incoming, right? It's going from the peripheral nervous system to the central nervous system. It is the same as sensory, right? Some books call it sensory. It's bringing, I think of it as sensory because that, in my mind, that makes more logical sense, right? This is bringing any sensory information to your brain. So think about sensory information from your, from your fingertip. You put your hand on a hot stove, that sensory information from your hand, from those receptors in your hand, is going to your brain. That's the sensory division, or the afferent division. Once that message gets to your central nervous system, your CNS then makes a decision about what to do, and it sends that out through the motor division. So efferent is the same as motor. And I always equate that with moving a muscle, because 99% of the time, that's what these messages are doing. They're being sent to a muscle to tell you to, move your hand. If it's on that hot stove, move your hand. The efferent division can also be divided further into somatic and autonomic. Again, somatic is voluntary, controls skeletal muscle. Autonomic is involuntary. So you're talking about controlling smooth and cardiac muscle, right? Those are the involuntary muscles. And the other part to that are glands. Glands are also controlled by your autonomic nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system is further divided to sympathetic and parasympathetic. Sympathetic is fight or flight, parasympathetic is rest and digest. So that's the kind of the overview of the nervous system. The neural tissue itself, when we went through tissues in chapter 4, I believe, the nervous tissue really only has 2 types of cells. There are neurons and neuroglia cells. Neurons are the basic functional units of the nervous system. Those are the cells that can communicate with one another, right? They can send and receive signals and all that sort of thing. The neuroglia do not send or receive signals. They are there to support the neurons. A lot of times they nourish the neurons. They can divide, right? Many neurons actually don't divide, or they divide very slowly. Neuroglial cells do divide. There are many more of them than there are neurons. Okay. And here's the general structure of a neuron. So I'm just going to skip to this part. So this is a typical neuron here in blue. Okay, the end with the nucleus and the organelles, that's called the cell body. So this whole big wide area on the left here, that's called the cell body. And you can see that includes a nucleus, and there are different organelles in there. There are mitochondria and Neese bodies and nucleolus and all those sorts of things. So that whole area is the cell body. Coming off of the cell body are these extensions called dendrites. Dendrites receive signals from other cells. So you don't have, say, one neuron going from your brain all the way to your finger, but you have a chain of them. And so one neuron activates the second, activates the third, all the way down the chain. And these dendrites are what are receiving the signal from another neuron. So the signal comes in through dendrites. The cell body kind of processes that signal, and it sends it down this long, slender extension called the axon. Okay. The axon hillock is just where the cell body meets the axon. It's kind of that wider area. So the signal is only going to move down the axon all the way to the end. And at the end of the axon are the axon terminals. These axon terminals are interacting with the next cell. And so here you can see they're interacting with another neuron. They're touching the cell body of this other neuron, so they're going to send their signals into the dendrites of this purple neuron that you're seeing over here. And so if you look at this under a microscope, you can see the cell body. You can see the nucleus and the nucleolus. You can see extensions coming off of the neuron, but you would be hard-pressed to tell me which of those extensions are dendrites and which one is the axon. Okay, I don't expect you to know that. Classification of neurons, right? There are sensory neurons, motor neurons, interneurons. Well, sensory neurons, guess what? They are afferent. They receive information from sensory receptors. So they're always carrying information from your senses, from whatever the sensory receptor is, towards your CNS, towards your brain. There are motor neurons, which are efferent. They are carrying information away from the central nervous system. Usually they are targeting muscles. Sometimes they're targeting glands. And then in your central nervous system, you have what are called interneurons, which are processing the information. They interconnect these two. So information, say I put my hand on a hot stove. I'm activating sensory neurons, which are then sending the message to interneurons, which are then relaying that message to motor neurons, right? That's always the pathway, sensory, intermotor. It's important to realize that when we go back to the neuron itself, a neuron can only send a signal in one direction. It can only send the signal from the cell body down the length of the axon towards the axon terminal. The signal can't move back the other way. The signal can never move towards the cell body. And so because of that, everywhere in your body, you have neurons running in one direction, and then you have a whole second set of neurons in exactly the same area running in the other direction, right? So I have in my fingertip and in my hand, I have neurons that are running towards my brain, right? They run all the way up my arm, all the way up the length of my arm towards my brain. And then in that same exact area, I have another set of neurons that run from my brain out to my hand, right? Because the neurons can only send a signal in one direction. You can't get a signal going both ways down the neuron. So I have sensory neurons going from my hand all the way up my arm towards my brain. I have interneurons in my brain, and I have motor neurons going all the way from my brain back out my arm to my fingers. Okay, and that's true everywhere in your body. You've got essentially two sets of neurons running through every area of your body. One set's going towards your brain, one set's going away from your brain. Question, Melissa? Oh, great.
Sorry, my mom called my phone. I was telling her I'm still in class.
That's okay. So, like I said, those are neurons. Neurons are the ones that can send and receive signals, but about half of all neural tissue is made up of neuroglial cells. Glial, the word glial comes from the same root word as glue, so you can think of them as holding things together, sticking things together. There are 4 types within the central nervous system. There are astrocytes, oligodendrocytes, microglia, and ependymal cells. And then there are 2 types within the peripheral nervous system. There are satellite cells and Schwann cells, right? And so here we can see neuroglia cells in the CNS. You have ependymal cells. They are simple cuboidal epithelial cells that line fluid-filled passageways. So again, they don't conduct or anything. They don't conduct any signals. There are microglial cells. Those are like white blood cells. They're phagocytes. They go around chewing up things that don't belong. There are astrocytes. Astrocytes are named because they're star-shaped, right? That's where the word astro comes from. They actually help form the blood-brain barrier, which separates the blood in the CNS. So they basically filter the blood that is going to and from the CNS so that if you happen to get any kind of bacteria or virus in your blood, it hopefully gets filtered out before it gets to your brain. And then you have oligodendrocytes. Those are cells with sheet-like processes that actually wrap around the neurons. So you can see some oligodendrocytes here. Right. And I'll back up again. In the PNS, you just have Schwann cells. Schwann cells are very much like oligodendrocytes. They wrap around the axon of the cells. They just have a different name in the PNS. And there are satellite cells, which are just very similar to microglia, right? They're going to go around and chew up things that don't belong. All right. So, all or none principle. We're talking about characteristics of an action potential. An action potential is literally the electrical signal going down the length of the axon. Every stimulus that brings a membrane to threshold will result in an identical action potential. The action potential will propagate down the length of the neuron. All that means is that you either stimulate the nerve with enough of a stimulus that it creates an action potential, or you don't. There's no halfway. They're not different degrees of action potential. You can't stimulate an individual neuron at 50% or at 75%. It's either all or none. It's either you've gone above that threshold where you've created the action potential, or you haven't, right? It's either the neuron's either sending a signal or it's not. That's it. Now, what we know as nerves are actually bundles of these neurons together. So within a nerve, you can activate only some of the neurons, right? And that will give you a less strong signal. But within an individual neuron, it's either all or nothing. You've either activated that neuron or you haven't. And then there's always this period of time after the action potential passes. It's called the refractory period. It's the time from when the action potential starts until it's complete. And so it's from when the neuron actually starts to change, and we'll see what that means in a minute, until it gets back to its original state. During that refractory period, the membrane cannot respond to further stimulation. So if that signal hasn't passed and the neuron hasn't gone back to its original state, you won't feel any further stimulation at that point. Okay, and so this limits the rate of response by neurons. So depending on where it is in your body, right, there are neurons that respond at different rates, but the limit to that is neurons can only respond as fast as the refractory period happens, right? So they can only respond once that refractory period has allowed the neuron to reset. It doesn't matter that the stimulus keeps on happening. You can't get that signal there. Stop me if you have any questions as we go along. The synapse is the site where the neuron communicates with another cell. So I'm going to flip back to this picture for a second. So the synapse would be between these axon terminals that are blue and the purple dendrites of the next cell. Right? The synapse is the area where one neuron connects with another cell. The information is transferred through the release of chemical messages called neurotransmitters. So what's going to happen, when I flip back to this again, is that neurotransmitters are going to be released from the axon terminal, and they are going to diffuse into the dendrite of the next cell. As I said, communication happens only in one direction, right? The dendrites receive that signal, and then if there's enough of a signal coming in, the neuron makes its action potential to go down the next axon. The synapse between a neuron and another cell type is called a neuroeffector junction. It can either be a neuromuscular junction or a neuroglandular junction. So in other words, the neuron's either sending a signal to a muscle or it's sending a signal to a gland. That's all those words mean. And so here's kind of a close-up of that. So here's the axon, right? And here's the axon terminal. And then here is the next cell, whatever that next cell might be. And the axon in this case, this purple cell, that's called the presynaptic neuron, right? That's the neuron before the synapse. This is called the postsynaptic neuron. So in this case, you're talking about one neuron sending a signal to another neuron. Like I said, there's a chain of them that would go down your body. The space in between the presynaptic neuron and the postsynaptic neuron, that's called the synapse or the synaptic cleft, right? So that's that little space in there. So what's going to happen is a signal will come down the length of the axon. Remember, signals can only travel from the cell body, which would be way up at the top of this page, down the length of the axon. Okay, and so it's going to come down this axon. And when it gets down here into the axon terminal, there are a bunch of synaptic vesicles. Now, if you remember from the cell biology chapter, vesicles are just boxes, right? They're just packages. We package things in vesicles. Our cells package things in vesicles. And these vesicles are neurotransmitters. So they are molecules that are going to transmit the signal from this neuron to the next cell. So in every axon terminal, you have synaptic vesicles. You have vesicles full of neurotransmitter. And they are going to send their neurotransmitter into this space, into the synaptic cleft. And that neurotransmitter is going to bind to receptors on the postsynaptic membrane. Right? And if enough of those neurotransmitters bind to these receptors, it's going to activate a signal in this postsynaptic neuron. So one neurotransmitter, there are at least 50 of them that are known. One that's commonly known and studied is acetylcholine. This is the specific neurotransmitter that's usually activating skeletal muscles, voluntary muscles. So the action potential arrives and it depolarizes the axon terminal. Acetylcholine is released and diffuses across the synaptic cleft. It binds to receptors and triggers the depolarization of the postsynaptic membrane, and then it's removed by an enzyme called acetylcholine esterase. So all that means is the signal comes down. These synaptic vesicles are filled with acetylcholine. They release the acetylcholine into this synaptic cleft, and the acetylcholine binds to receptors on the postsynaptic membrane. And it triggers a response in this cell, this postsynaptic neuron. Whatever acetylcholine is left kind of in this space is chewed up by an enzyme, and that's what this acetylcholine esterase is. So in other words, you get the signal, and it doesn't last for very long because whatever acetylcholine is left over there gets chewed up. So then once that's chewed up, there's nothing binding to these receptors. There's nothing stimulating this postsynaptic cell. Questions about any of that stuff? So now we start getting into more of the gross anatomy, right? This is more of the big structural anatomy kind of stuff. Surrounding your central nervous system are layers called meninges. We have 3 of them. They are for stability, protection, spinal fluid flow, and interaction with blood vessels. There are 3 layers. So they're not just surrounding the brain, but they're surrounding the spinal cord. That is part of the central nervous system. The outermost layer is dura mater, and mater in Latin is mother, right? So this literally is tough mother. That's the outer layer is the tough mother. The middle layer is called the arachnoid mater. What's arachnoid remind you of?
Spiders.
Spiders. So the arachnoid mater, because it gets down into all those grooves, it looks like a spider web, right? It looked like kind of a black spider web that was over the brain. And that's where the arachnoid mater gets its name from. And then the pia mater is the innermost layer. It's just a very thin layer on the underneath the arachnoid mater. They do surround the brain and the spinal cord. The cranial meninges are continuous with the spinal meninges, so it's just one layer. It goes all the way from your brain down along your entire spinal cord. The brain itself contains 97% of the body's nervous tissue. Isn't that crazy? Most of the body's nervous tissue is in your brain. When you think about even all the nerves that are running through our body, the brain has so much more nervous tissue. The typical brain weighs about 3 pounds. If you've ever seen the movie Seven, you probably remember that. Brain size varies among individuals. There is no correlation between brain size and intelligence. So it doesn't matter if you have a big brain or not. Doesn't necessarily mean you're smarter. 6 major regions of the brain. So a lot of these are what we saw today, and this is kind of why I wanted you to save what we did today. So this picture is a human brain, right? A lot different than the sheep brain that we saw. Specifically, what's different is the size of this cerebrum, right? What separates us from other animals is that our cerebrum is much larger, meaning that we have a lot more conscious thought. We have the ability to do a lot more logic and creating language and things like that, right? You definitely saw the cerebellum and the medulla oblongata, right? I lost my cursor again. The cerebellum, the pons, the medulla oblongata. You also notice that it's structured a little bit different. Think about the brain we dissected was a sheep brain, so think about how its brain is continuous with its spinal cord because it's on 4 legs, right? Its spinal cord is horizontal, whereas we are vertical. So our brain, it's kind of turned a little bit, right? As compared to our brain. But the 6 major regions are the same for all mammals. There is the cerebrum, this big, huge area. There is the diencephalon. Now the diencephalon is going to include parts here down towards the bottom of the middle. We'll see that when we look at some other pictures of the brain. The midbrain, which is right about here, the pons, the medulla oblongata, and the cerebellum. The cerebrum is divided into cerebral hemispheres. Its functions are things like conscious thoughts, sensations, intellectual functions, memory, storage, and processing. All of that, all of the higher brain functions happen in the cerebrum. The diencephalon includes the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and the epithalamus. This functions as a processing center, a relay station. It controls a lot of the autonomic functions, and hormones. So the hypothalamus really controls all of our hormones, which are things, not only like testosterone and estrogen, but insulin and glucagon are hormones that control blood sugar levels. Calcitonin and parathyroid hormone are hormones that control calcium levels in your blood. So they're controlling a lot of these homeostasis factors. The thalamus is kind of a relay station for a lot of the information coming either up through your spine to your brain, has to go through your thalamus, or going the opposite way, right? Going from your higher brain, from your cerebrum, it goes through the thalamus to get to your motor neurons. The brain stem is what looks like a stem on the back of the brain, right? And it contains the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. And these are autonomic functions as well. This is considered the most primitive part, the most ancient part of the brain. And these are controlling things like your heart rate and your breathing rate, okay? Automatic functions such as that. And then the cerebellum is the most inferior, posterior portion of the brain. So it's back and down the furthest. And its function, it says some motor activities. I don't love the way that says it. It's, do you guys know what proprioception is? Anybody have ever heard that word? So proprioception is a sense of knowing where your body is in space. So a lot of really great athletes have a really well-developed sense of proprioception, right? You look at somebody like Michael Jordan or LeBron James, they're up in the air and they know exactly where their limbs are and how to move, right? Proprioception is a sense that's developed. It's not something that you're not born with a great sense of proprioception, but you learn it and develop it. So I have a toddler. I have a 1.5-year-old. She doesn't run real easily across the floor, right? Toddlers always look like they're about to fall over because they haven't really developed that sense of proprioception yet. They haven't really developed the sense of knowing where their limbs are and knowing exactly which muscles to contract and which to relax, right? If you take a young kid who's on a bike with training wheels and take the training wheels off, will that young child just ride nice and straight? No, generally what'll happen, they'll do this, right? They'll be all over the place. They're jerking their bike all around because they don't know which muscles to relax and which to contract, right? In order to just keep themselves upright and balanced. Same thing, it's a lot of the eye-hand coordination stuff. So, swinging a golf club or a baseball bat. Repetitive activities like tying your shoe, right? You can tie your shoe and look up and not be staring at your hands and still tie your shoe. You can take notes in class or type on a keyboard and probably not look at your fingers, right? But still keep doing what you're doing. So all of those things are the sense that is controlled by your cerebellum. So it says some motor activities, which, I mean, it is, right? Typing or riding a bike is a motor activity, but it's really that sense of proprioception, of knowing where your body is in space.
Humans are the only, when they're immediately don't walk after birth. Is that right?
I don't know if that's right, but we might
That's
be one of the
interesting.
only ones. Most animals do. Like if you grow up on a farm or anything, most of
Right.
the animals learn how to walk within hours.
That's interesting, since it
Yeah,
comes from that part of the brain and that's something shared,
right,
Huh.
absolutely. I'm going to stop there because we've hit 3 o'clock. So I'm going to stop there. We're going to keep going with this tomorrow. Where am I? I'm on 22. Yeah, so I'm about halfway through. So that's good. So I'll stop there and we'll keep going tomorrow. And you'll see as we go through where some of these sections of the brain or regions of the brain are. Some of it will trigger your memory of the dissection from today. And that's why I said, save those brains if you can, because tomorrow you might go back and be able to look at those and say, oh, okay, here, now I understand better where the hypothalamus is, or, what the medulla or the pons looks like, that kind of thing. Okay. So we'll stop there and we'll come back tomorrow and we'll start, we'll pick up where we left off. We'll start talking about the ventricles of the brain. So are there any questions before I let you guys go today?
For the lab, so we're just gonna have to take pictures of, are you gonna be specific with what we take pictures of, or?
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll go through the PDF that I posted, but if you just follow along with that PDF, it tells you where to take pictures, but I can post, okay, please upload whatever it is. I don't know if it's 4 pictures or something here at this point, pointing to this structure, whatever, that kind of thing. But that's what that PDF kind of goes through. So I'll make sure to read that and just make sure that I outline, okay, I want a picture of this structure and a picture of the second structure, that kind of thing.
Okay,
But that'll
thank
be
you.
yeah. Other questions? All right. Well, if there are no other questions, I will see you guys around 3 o'clock tomorrow. Right?
Bye, everybody.
Have a
Bye,
great day.
thank you.
Thank you.
Night.